The road to the castle took 2 weeks and cost her the last of what her father had left behind, which was not much. A mule that went lame on the 4th day. A wool cloak with a hole she kept meaning to patch. A name that opened doors in the merchant quarter back home, but meant nothing at all in the Highlands. Nora walked the last 3 days on her own feet. The castle sat at the end of a road that climbed through pine forest before flattening into an open approach of gray stone and dry grass. She had expected walls. She had not expected them to be this tall or this old, the kind of old that accumulates in layers, each century pressing down on the one before it, until the whole structure looked less like something built and more like something that had simply grown out of the ground and refused to leave. She stopped at the gate and gave her name to the guard. He checked a ledger, found it, let her through without a word. The steward who received her inside the main hall was a narrow man with ink-stained fingers and the expression of someone who had explained the same things too many times. He spoke while walking, pointing at doors, reciting rules. She caught perhaps half of it. Her left ear had been unreliable since childhood, and the steward spoke to the wall in front of him rather than to her face, which made reading his lips impossible. She did not tell him this. She had learned early that announcing the ear made people either speak too slowly or stop bothering altogether, and neither was useful. She nodded where nodding seemed appropriate and accepted the folded paper he pressed into her hands at the end, a map of the servants' quarters and work assignments written out. She had asked for that in the letter arranging her placement. Some things she had learned to arrange in advance. Her room was on the 2nd floor of the East Service Wing. Small, clean, with a window that looked out over a walled garden below. She set her pack on the bed and read the written instructions twice before the candle burned down. The debt her father had carried was 11 years in the making, borrowing against harvests that never quite recovered, against a run of bad winters, against the kind of slow misfortune that does not arrive all at once but settles instead, season by season, until the weight of it is simply what life feels like. He had died in the winter, owing a sum she could not pay in coin. The arrangement was 3 years of service. After that, the ledger would be clear. She was 22. She had nowhere else to be. The 2nd morning, she was sent to collect grain from the eastern stores. The instructions had been verbal, delivered by a kitchen girl who spoke quickly and gestured in 3 directions at once. Nora had caught the word eastern and the word stores and had filled in the rest herself, which was how she ended up in the wrong courtyard. It was not obviously wrong. The path looked like a service path. The door in the wall was unlocked. The courtyard beyond was large and quiet, paved in old stone, with a water trough along one side and straw scattered near the far wall. She was 6 steps in before she noticed the others. 2 stable hands stood frozen against the wall to her left, not working, not moving, both staring at something ahead with a rigid, held-breath stillness that had nothing to do with ordinary caution. Something older than thought had taken hold of them. Something that had decided staying motionless was the only remaining option. Nora followed their eyes. The wolf was enormous. She had seen wolves before. Her father's village sat at the edge of a forest where packs moved through in winter, and she had watched them from windows and from trees, and once from a ditch when she was 9 and had made the mistake of walking home after dark. She knew wolves. She knew the range of them. This was not within that range. It stood in the far corner of the courtyard, with its back partially to her, head lowered, the ridge of its spine level with her shoulder. The coat was black, the kind of black with no warmth in it, no brown, no red, nothing that softened it at any angle of light. The head swung toward her when she stopped, and she saw the face. A scar cut from the right nostril down through the lip, pulling it slightly open so that the teeth on that side were always visible. Not fresh. Old and settled, pale against the black fur, the kind of mark that had been part of a face long enough to belong to it. The eyes were amber, deep amber, the color of old resin, the color of something that had been present in this world for a very long time. The wolf was not crouching. It was not advancing. It stood the way a spent thing stands, weight slightly back, head down, watching her with an attention that was neither hunger nor indifference. There was something behind it, working, that she could not name. But it was hungry. She could see that much in the tightness around the shoulders, the hollow behind the ribs. The stable hands had not moved. She could feel the particular quality of their stillness. They were not going to help her. They were not going to do anything at all. Nora looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at Nora. She reached into the pocket of her apron. She had not finished breakfast. The bread from the morning meal was still there, wrapped in cloth, taken to eat on the walk to the stores. She pulled it out, unwrapped it. She crouched slowly, lowering herself until she was less tall, less upright, less of whatever shape made large animals read humans as something to be managed. She set the bread on the stone between them. Then she stood and stepped backward 3 paces and stopped. The wolf did not move for a long moment. Then it stepped forward, lowered its head, ate. When it lifted its head again, it looked at her. The amber eyes held on her face. Its tail moved once, one slow, single motion, barely more than a shift of weight at the end of its spine, and then went still. Nora exhaled. Behind her, she heard one of the stable hands make a sound that was not quite a word. She turned and walked back through the door in the wall. Found a passing kitchen worker in the corridor beyond, showed the written instructions, and was redirected to the correct courtyard without incident. She collected the grain. She returned to the kitchen. She completed the rest of the morning's assigned work. It was only when the afternoon light shifted and Maeve appeared in the kitchen doorway, the head caretaker of the East Wing, gray-haired and unbothered by most things, with the bearing of someone who had simply outlasted the people who used to unsettle her, that Nora understood something had been set in motion that morning without her knowledge. "You went into the lower courtyard," Maeve said. "I took a wrong turn." "You fed him. He was hungry." Maeve looked at her for a moment. Whatever she was sorting through, she kept it off her face. "Come with me," she said. "The king wants to see you." The room Harlan received her in was not the throne room. It was a smaller space off the main corridor, a working room with a table, chairs, and a fire that had burned long enough to settle into steady, even heat. Maps covered one wall. A cup of something sat cooling near the window. He was already standing when she entered. She had seen his portrait in the merchant towns, required postings, political displays. The portraits had done him a practical service by being accurate without being revealing. They showed a man. They did not convey the quality of attention he carried into a room, the way everything seemed to orient itself differently once he was in it. He was 28, dark hair to his shoulders, loose. A beard kept short and close. A scar across the chin, horizontal, long-heeled. His eyes were amber, and she recognized the color before she understood why. "Sit," he said. She sat. He remained standing. "Tell me what happened." She told him. Plainly, without arrangement, wrong courtyard, the wolf, the bread, the tail. When she finished, he was quiet. "You weren't afraid of him. I was careful. There's a difference." "Yes." He studied her. No one has been within 10 feet of that wolf without being attacked in 9 years. He said it without drama, as a fact being set down between them. The last person who made the attempt was a trained healer. He survived the first attack and died 9 days later. Nora kept her hands still in her lap. "I didn't make an attempt at anything. I gave him food." "Why?" She considered it seriously. He looked hungry. "I had food." Harlan moved to the window. He stood with his back partially to her, looking down at the courtyard below. When he spoke again, his voice had the quality of something being decided rather than stated. "You're here for the debt." "Yes." 3 years. "Yes." "Then you'll remain within the castle grounds until I've resolved what to do with this." He turned from the window. "You won't go into the lower courtyard again without permission. You won't discuss what happened with the other servants. If the wolf comes to you..." He stopped. His jaw shifted. He tried again. "If you encounter him again, you send word to me directly." Nora looked at him. "Am I in trouble?" "No." The word came flat and immediate. "You are a complication." He did not say it with cruelty. She believed the distinction mattered to him. She left the room with no clearer picture of what she had walked into than when she had entered it. The corridors back to the servants' wing were long, and the light through the narrow windows was already going orange with late afternoon. She passed 2 servants who looked at her and looked away quickly, which told her that word had moved faster than she had. The east wing at night quieted in layers. The upper hall first, then the lower, then the stretch of corridor near the outer wall where her room sat. She had grown accustomed to the way sounds arrived unevenly. Some things muffled, some sharp, the left side of the world always slightly delayed. She had learned to use the floor instead. Vibrations read truer than sound. She was almost asleep when she felt the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving down the corridor outside her door and stopping. She lay still. The weight did not move away. She got up, crossed to the door, opened it. The wolf sat in the corridor outside her room, filling the narrow passage in a way that should not have been possible. The amber eyes caught the faint light from the wall torch at the far end of the hall and held it, steady and unblinking. Behind her, further down the passage, a door opened. Maeve appeared with a candle, in a sleeping robe, gray hair loose around her shoulders. She looked at the wolf. She looked at Nora. Something moved through her expression, old and complicated, the look of someone who has been waiting a very long time to find out whether a thing they feared might be possible actually was. "He's never come to this wing," Maeve said. Her voice was barely above a breath. "In 9 years, he has never once come here." Nora looked at the wolf. He had lowered his head. The massive shoulders settled. The chin tilted down until his scarred muzzle was close to the stone floor, and the amber eyes stayed on her face. "Go to sleep," Nora told him. She did not expect it to work. She closed the door anyway. She stood in the dark on the other side of it and listened. The floor gave her nothing moving away. He did not leave. She went back to bed, lay down. The ceiling beams were low and dark above her, the room cold at the edges where the fire had not reached. 3 years she had agreed to. A castle she did not know. A king who had called her a complication without explaining the shape of the problem. And now something enormous and ancient sitting outside her door, as though it had determined, on the basis of a single piece of bread, that this was where it was supposed to be. She stared at the ceiling until her eyes grew heavy. When she opened her door at dawn, the corridor was empty, but the stone outside her threshold held the pressed warmth of where something large had lain through the cold hours of the night. She stood there looking at it. Then she tied her apron, picked up her assigned list for the day, and went to begin the morning's work. By the 3rd morning, the servants had developed a system. No one announced it. No one sat down and agreed to it. It simply emerged, the way workarounds always emerge when people who cannot solve a problem still have to live alongside it. Those assigned to the same corridors as Nora began timing their arrivals differently. Breakfast tasks that previously overlapped now had a gap of 20 minutes built in. The woman who brought fresh water to the east wing each morning started knocking instead of walking in. She sent word to Harlan the first morning it happened, through one of the kitchen girls who carried messages between wings when speed mattered more than formality. By midday, a reply came back through Maeve. "Continue the day's work, keep the other servants clear, and send again only if the wolf showed signs of aggression." He never did. The wolf followed Nora, not constantly, not attached to her heel the way a dog follows its owner. He was never waiting when she turned a corner unexpectedly, never underfoot in the narrow back passages. But if she moved from one part of the castle to another and arrived and began to work, he would appear. He would settle at the far edge of whatever space she occupied, 10 feet away, sometimes more, and stay. When she moved, eventually he moved. He did not require anything from her. He did not approach. He was simply there, the way a shadow is there, except that shadows do not breathe, and this thing did. Each exhale a slow and deliberate sound in the silence of whichever corridor she occupied. Nora adapted. She had spent enough years rearranging the way she moved through the world to recognize when adaptation was simpler than resistance. The wolf's presence scattered other servants. That was inconvenient in certain respects. But it also meant the corridor outside the linen room was usually clear when she needed to count inventory. And the back staircase nobody used anymore was now hers alone for the better part of each morning. She began to notice things. The left ear sat higher than the right, a permanent effect of an old injury to the right side of the skull, she suspected. When something caught his attention, the left swiveled first. She noticed the difference in rigidity between his front legs when he was simply alert versus when something had specifically registered as a threat. The right paw rotated slightly inward in the second case, weight redistributing toward the haunches. She noticed the particular angle at which his head dropped when he was about to settle for a long period versus when he intended to move again within minutes. She started writing it down. She carried a small notebook for the same reason she had asked for written instructions on her first day. Things she might miss through hearing needed to exist somewhere she could return to them. She began adding pages to the back. It was not a project. It was habit. She did not consider it worth remarking upon until she found herself halfway through the 4th page. Harlan came to the East Wing 11 days after the courtyard incident. He did not send for her. He arrived in the corridor where she was working, accompanied by no one, and she did not hear him until he was already close. She had been facing the wall with a polishing cloth, and by the time the vibration of his footsteps reached her through the stone floor, he was standing a few feet behind her. She turned. "Carry on," he said. He stood with his arms at his sides, watching her work. He looked tired in the particular way of someone carrying a long accumulation rather than a single bad night. "No reports of injury," he said after a moment, "from anyone on the staff." "No. He follows you through the full day now. Most of it. And you've simply continued working. The work doesn't change because he's watching it." He was quiet after that. She kept moving the cloth across the stone. The wolf was somewhere on the lower level. She had learned his particular stillness when Harlan was in the same building, the way his head oriented toward the direction of the king, regardless of distance. She had not written that one down yet. She was still working out what it meant. "May I ask you something?" she said. A pause, not a refusal. "Is this the first time he has followed someone?" Not approached, not reacted. Followed, consistently. The silence before his answer was enough of an answer on its own. "Yes," he said. "It is." She nodded and went back to the cloth. He remained a moment longer. "You've been making observations," he said. "About him." She set down the cloth, drew the notebook from her apron pocket and held it out without turning fully around. He took it. She resumed work while he read. She heard nothing from him. No sound of pages, no shift of breath, nothing that told her where in the notebook he was or what he made of what he found there. When he returned it, his hand passed it into hers steadily enough, but slowly, with the care of someone handling something they have not decided what to do with yet. "Keep going," he said. She did not watch him leave. She waited until the floor carried no trace of him, then sat on the bottom stair of the nearby steps and opened the notebook to the last entry. She had noted that morning that the wolf lay differently when the castle was entirely quiet versus when there were people moving somewhere in it. Not a behavioral difference, a postural one, a thing in the angle of the spine. She had spent 10 minutes trying to find the right word for it. She still had not found it. She left a blank space and moved on. The gallery was on the 3rd floor of the north wing, behind heavy doors that were unlocked but rarely opened. She found it toward the end of the 2nd week, following her own method of learning a building, walking it room by room until it existed in her feet as much as in her eyes, because she could not rely on being directed to a place she had not already mapped herself. The portraits were old, most of them. The frames darkened. The painted faces settled into the kind of formality that eventually makes all old portraits look more like each other than like the people they were meant to represent. She moved down the length of the room without hurrying. She stopped at the 4th portrait from the far wall. 2 men. The younger was immediately recognizable, sharper in the jaw, the beard absent, the years not yet accumulated behind his eyes. But the amber irises were unmistakable. Harlan, younger by perhaps 8 or 9 years from how he looked now. Beside him stood a taller man, broader across the shoulder, dark-haired, older by roughly the same margin. The painter had worked the light to favor the left side of the face and let the right fall into shadow, which suggested something about the subject's preference. The nose was slightly crooked along the bridge, healed from an old break. The jaw was heavier than Harlan's. The eyes were amber, the exact shade, the same depth, the same quality in the painted gaze that she had seen from 9 feet away in a dark courtyard with her pulse moving fast in her throat. She stood in front of the portrait and did not move for a long time. She found Maeve that evening in the small caretaker's room at the end of the service hall, where Maeve spent her evenings reviewing supply tallies with the door slightly open. Nora knocked and entered and closed the door behind her. "The North Gallery," she said. "The man standing beside the king in the fourth portrait." Maeve set down her ledger. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who has been waiting for a specific door to be knocked on and is now calculating how far to open it. "Sit down," Maeve said. Nora sat. Maeve's hands went flat on the closed ledger. She took a breath and spoke with the plainness of someone getting through something they have rehearsed but not looked forward to. "His name is Vial, the crown prince of this realm. First in succession. He would be 37 now." She stopped, continued. 9 years ago, during a patrol through the Northern Territories, he encountered a practitioner, a woman who had been working those roads for some time. She wanted his cooperation in destroying a village that had driven her out. Vial refused and sent a report to the king, his father. She cursed him. She came to this gate before dawn the following morning. I was the one who handled early deliveries in those hours. The king's steward kept late hours, and someone had to be present at first light. Maeve's voice held. She arrived at the gate with the wolf beside her. She had a rope around his neck, which he could have broken without effort. I understood immediately that the rope was not a restraint. It was a presentation. She handed me the lead and gave me a sealed note for the king. Then, before she left, she spoke to me directly. Nora waited. She said the curse could be broken. She said she would tell me the conditions. Maeve's gaze settled somewhere slightly past Nora's shoulder. I asked her why. She said it was not charity. She said breaking the curse would require a person this castle did not yet have, and that making someone wait and watch and know it was possible without being able to act on it was more punishment than simply sealing it shut. She gave you the conditions as an added cruelty. Yes. What are they? Maeve looked at her directly. You have been here 2 weeks. I know. The first condition requires a specific act from a specific kind of person. In 9 years, 11 people attempted proximity with him. 1 died. 3 were injured enough to need the healer's attention for weeks afterward. The rest turned back before he reached them. She paused. I was watching through the kitchen passage window on the morning you fed him. Nora kept her eyes on the older woman's face and said nothing. I am not going to give you the rest of it tonight, Maeve said. Not because I distrust you, because what the next condition requires carries real and physical danger, and you have been inside these walls for 14 days. I need more than a fortnight before I put that weight in someone's hands. She held Nora's gaze without apology. What I will tell you is that the man in that portrait is still present. The amber eyes are the same because they are the same eyes. He is not an animal that was once a man. He is a man who has been living in an animal's body for 9 years without breaking. The room was quiet for a moment. Does Harlan know the full conditions? Nora asked. Harlan received the sealed note. The ink held for 1 reading and then disappeared. It was fixed to transfer only to whoever received it by hand. He has known for 9 years that a clause exists. Maeve's voice was even. He has never been able to read it. And you have not told him what you know. I have told him the conditions require someone specific rather than someone trained. I have not told him what is required of that person. She reopened the ledger. I will, when the time calls for it. Nora stood. She crossed to the door. Before she opened it, she said, Why did you tell me any of it tonight? Maeve looked up. Because that woman did me a cruelty I have lived alongside for 9 years. And I wanted you to understand what you may be walking toward before you walked further into it. She returned to the page. Now go to bed. The walled garden was her place during the half hour after the midday meal, when the kitchen emptied and the senior staff retired to their respective errands. It was past the warmest part of the season. The trees along the inner wall had begun to shed, and the stone benches held the cold until mid-afternoon. But it was outside, which mattered more to her than comfort. She had been using it for 4 days when Lord Fenwick found her. She had seen him in passing around the castle. A man of 40 or so, with the angular features and the unhurried ease of someone accustomed to rooms that reorganized themselves around his presence without his having to ask. Connected to the crown, she had gathered. The specifics she had not yet established. He settled on the low wall opposite her bench with the bearing of someone pausing by chance, though nothing else about him suggested chance governed much of his movement. "The new ward," he said pleasantly. "I've been meaning to introduce myself." She gave him her name and waited. "I understand you've been navigating things rather remarkably," he said. With the wolf, the word sat differently in his mouth than it did in Maeve's or Harlan's. More distant. The observation of someone reviewing a report rather than someone who had ever stood in the same room with the thing being discussed. "He watches while I work. There isn't much to navigate." "No, perhaps not at present." He looked at the far wall for a moment. "There was a man here 5 years ago. A healer, well regarded, recommended by practitioners across 3 territories. The king brought him specifically. Genuine skill, real patience." He turned to look at her. His expression was measured and not unkind, and she noted that the absence of unkindness was the quality to watch most carefully. "He lived 9 days after the attack." The king mentioned it. Fenwick received that without visible reaction. "I raise it only because it would be easy to misread a period of tolerance. A week, 2 weeks, a person might begin to assume the worst has passed, that something has fundamentally shifted." He rose from the wall without hurry. "The wolf has not changed. What has changed is that he has not yet decided to." He left through the garden's side gate. Nora sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the wall where he had been. He had delivered the account of the healer with the smooth precision of someone who had decided exactly where to place the pauses. She sat with that. She sat with the fact that he had found this garden in this particular half-hour window, which she had only established 4 days ago. Someone had told him her patterns. She turned that over carefully and filed it somewhere she would not lose it. The following morning, Vielle was waiting outside the linen room when she came around the corner. He raised his head. The left ear tracked first, as it always did. The amber eyes found her face and held there with an attention that had nothing animal in it. She propped the door open with the stone she now kept for the purpose. "Inside or outside?" she said. He moved to the threshold, lay down across it with his chin on his forepaws. "Not in, not out." She pulled out the notebook, added a short line. Then she stepped past him and started the day's work. She found him on the 23rd morning. The lower courtyard was not part of her route. It had not been since the first week, when Harlan had told her to stay clear of it. She had no business there. But the wolf had not come to the linen room at his usual hour, and the east corridor, where he sometimes settled through the midday, was empty. And when she checked the threshold of her room at dusk, it held nothing. And by the following dawn, when his absence had stretched into something solid enough to notice, she went. The lower courtyard was dim at that hour. The sun had not cleared the eastern wall, and the stone held the cold of the night through its cracks and seams. She came through the side passage and stopped at the edge. Vielle lay against the far wall. Not in his settled position, not in any position she had recorded in the notebook. He was on his side with his legs moving in slow, uncoordinated intervals, as though his body had issued an instruction and the limbs had partially complied and then lost the signal. His breathing came in visible intervals, the ribcage lifting hard, dropping too fast, lifting again. Along his spine, starting at the base of the neck and running between his shoulder blades, the fur was doing something she had no word for. It was receding, pulling back in patches, revealing skin beneath, and then returning, rising again like a tide moving in reverse, a cycle that repeated and produced a low sound each time, something between a vibration and a groan that she felt through the soles of her boots rather than heard through her ears. She crossed the courtyard. She knelt beside him and put her hand on his shoulder. He flinched, which he had never done, and she kept her hand steady and let the flinch pass through him without removing it. Beneath her palm, the skin was wrong. Not the warmth of a healthy animal, but a dry, crackling heat. The kind that has been burning too long from the inside. She looked up and found one of the kitchen workers watching from the passage doorway. "Get the healer," she said. "Get the king." In that order, the worker disappeared. She turned back to Vielle. He was looking at her. The amber eyes were open and present and entirely focused on her face, and that was the part that required the most of her. holding his gaze while his spine went through another wave, the fur flattening and pulling and returning, his body cycling through something it had not been built to cycle through. A process going wrong at an interval that was getting shorter. She moved her hand from his shoulder to the side of his jaw. Not movement, just weight. She had learned early that he responded to stillness differently than to motion. That held contact was its own kind of information. "Stay with me," she said. His eyes did not close. The healer arrived before Harlan did, which was fortunate because the healer needed those minutes to make his examination without stopping to explain himself. He was a man of perhaps 50, with the economical manner of someone who had decided long ago that urgency and composure were not in conflict. He moved around Vielle with care and speed in the same motion, and he did not ask Nora to step back, which told her he had worked in difficult spaces before. She watched his hands move, thorough and unhurried along the wolf's belly and hindquarters, checking lymph tissue and muscle response with a short series of pressure tests she half recognized from healers in her father's village, though the application here was different. When he pressed 2 fingers under the jaw and held them against the pulse for a long count, his expression changed. "Lunar compound," he said, quietly. Not to her, to himself. Then he looked at her. "Night bloom root. It's used in magical binding work. Disrupts concentrated spell work at the site where it has embedded itself over time." He looked back at Vielle. When the spell work is old enough to have become part of the body's architecture, the disruption does not stay local. "Can you treat it? I can manage the fever and slow the worst of the cycling. The disruption will have to run its course." He opened his bag. "Hold his head." She held his head. Both hands along the sides of Vielle's jaw, thumbs near the scarred muzzle, and she did not move or look away during any of what followed. The first compound went in at the back of the throat by way of a bone instrument she had not seen before. The wolf's body went rigid for a count of 5 and then released, and the interval between the waves along his spine lengthened measurably. The second compound was worked into the skin over the shoulder blades with the healer's knuckles, pressing along the line of the worst of the disruption, and this produced a sound from Vielle that had nothing animal about it. It came from somewhere beneath what a body should be able to reach and moved outward through the stone underneath them. Nora kept her hands where they were. When Harlan arrived, she did not hear him. She felt the change in the courtyard, the way the 2 stable hands who had drifted in went rigid and lowered their eyes in a single uniform motion. The healer's pace did not change. She looked up. Harlan stood at the edge of the cleared space, dressed as if he had left his rooms quickly. His eyes moved from the healer to the wolf to her hands and stayed there for a moment before meeting her face. She said nothing. He had asked to be sent for. Someone had sent for him. Everything else could wait. He came forward and crouched a few feet from Vielle's hindquarters, the healer's working end, where there was room. He did not reach for the wolf. He sat in that crouch with his forearms on his knees and watched the healer's hands. "How long?" he said. "She found him this morning," the healer answered. The disruption had been active for some hours prior. It was past its worst when she arrived. "Will he recover?" "Yes." The healer's hands paused on the shoulder blades. He pressed once more firmly, and the line of fur along Vielle's spine settled into something that was only fur. 2 to 3 days for the compound to clear. He needs rest. He looked at Harlan steadily. And someone should determine how the night bloom root was administered. It did not arrive here by accident. The compound is not common, and it is not cheap. Harlan's gaze moved to the far side of the courtyard. A wooden feeding trough sat along that wall, the remnants of whatever Vielle had eaten the previous evening still in it. He looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then he stood. "Move him inside," he said to the stable hands. "The chamber off the east passage. Keep the fire going." He looked at Nora. "Come to my office when you're done here." He left. She stayed while the stable hands worked out the logistics of moving Vielle without aggravating him. She stayed while the healer supervised the transfer and prepared the chamber. She stayed until the wolf was settled on clean straw with the fire going, and his breathing had found a recognizable rhythm, and his eyes had closed. The healer caught her at the doorway on her way out. He did not resist her hands, he said. It was not a question. No. He studied her briefly, Not the way he studied a patient, something different. Then he nodded once and let her pass. Harlan's office held the same maps it always held, moved to different positions. He was standing beside the table when she arrived, but he had not been reviewing anything on it. He had been standing. "Sit," he said. She sat. He remained standing. He had the bearing of someone who had been thinking hard in the interval between the courtyard and this room and had arrived at conclusions he did not yet trust. "You went there on your own this morning." He didn't come to his usual places. "I went to look for him. I told you to stay clear of the lower courtyard." "You did." He looked at her. "And you went anyway. You said stay clear of it. You said nothing about what I should do if he was in trouble and I had no other way to know." A pause. He moved to the chair across from her and sat, which was new. He had stood through both their previous conversations. The healer's assessment is that the Nightbloom root was added to his feed, last night, most likely. He set his hands flat on the table. Someone with access to the castle grounds and knowledge of magical compounds. That's a short list. "Yes." She waited. "I am going to investigate. The process will be thorough and it will take time, because I do not move against a man of Fenwick's position without certainty." He held her gaze. Not suspicion. She understood. She also understood that he had just given her the name he had in mind, which he had not needed to do. "He came to the garden 2 weeks ago," she said. "He told me about the healer from 5 years ago, the one who died afterward." Harlan went still. "He knew my patterns. He found that garden in my 4th day using it." She kept her voice level. "Someone gave him that information, or he gathered it himself. Either way, he had been watching me before he decided it was worth introducing himself." Harlan sat with that. Then he crossed to the window and stood with one hand on the stone frame. "I want to move you to the northern wing," he said. "Different corridors, further from Fenwick's regular movement through the castle." Nora looked at his back. "You want to remove me from the situation. I want to reduce your exposure. If I am the reason Vielle is showing signs of something beyond instinct, your words, then moving me changes that." He said nothing for a long moment. "The healer said he did not resist her hands," Harlan said. "In 9 years, he has never permitted a healer's examination. He has never let anyone touch him outside of one person at a time, briefly, with his cooperation." He turned from the window. "You held his head through the full treatment. I was the one already there." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." She looked at him. He had assembled a picture he would have preferred not to look at directly. She could see him deciding what to do with it. "I won't move you," he said. "But you will not go to the lower courtyard unaccompanied, and if Fenwick approaches you again, you tell me the same day." "Agreed." He nodded once. She stood. "Nora." She stopped at the door. "Thank you," he said, "for this morning." Vielle recovered over the following 3 days in the chamber off the East Passage. He refused food on the first day entirely. On the second, he overturned the water basin and had to be given water from a bucket held at arm's length by the most patient of the stable hands. When the fever eased enough for movement, he paced, tight, methodical, the same line of floor repeated without variation, and the pacing had nothing of his usual deliberateness in it. It was driven, as though the night his body had been pushed toward 2 forms at once had left something displaced that could not find its original position. She brought his meals herself, not by assignment. The stable hands had begun leaving the food outside the door and retreating, and someone had to go in. He did not overturn anything when she brought it. By the 3rd day he was eating, the fever had cleared, and the fur along his spine had stopped its cycling. She sat in the doorway with the notebook while he ate, not watching him directly. Peripheral attention, not frontal, the way she had learned he preferred. The fire had settled to coals. The herbs the healer had left burning in a small dish near the door had gone to ash. She was 3 entries into a new page when she became aware that he had stopped eating and was watching her. She looked up. He was still across the room, the bowl near his front paws, chin level. The amber eyes held the same contained and specific attention they had carried through the worst of the fever. Not the unfocused state of an animal recovering. Something else. Something that had been observing and processing every hour of the past 3 days. She held his gaze. "Fenwick," she said. Something shifted in the line of his shoulders, an acknowledgement with no name attached to it. "Harlan knows as well," she said. She closed the notebook. He lowered his chin to his paws. The coals in the fire shifted and resettled, and the room went quieter, and she stayed until the light through the narrow window above the door had moved all the way across the floor and gone. Fenwick presented his case on a Tuesday. Nora learned about it the way she learned most things that happened in the upper halls, through the arrangement of people around her, rather than through direct information. The senior staff moved differently that morning. Tighter. The kind of efficiency that is not efficiency at all, but contained alarm wearing its clothes. Maeve did not appear at breakfast. 2 of the household stewards who normally crossed the East Wing by midday did not cross it. The king's private secretary, a thin man named Orwell, who treated all non-essential personnel as furniture, walked through the servants' hall with his eyes focused on something that was not in the room. She asked one of the kitchen girls. The girl glanced at the door before answering. "Lord Fenwick," she said quietly. "He brought papers to the morning court. Some kind of legal argument." She paused. "About the prince." Nora went back to her work and did not ask anything else. She found out the rest in pieces over the following hours, accumulated from fragments of conversation around corners and the particular way Vielle behaved in the afternoon, pacing the east corridor with a rigidity she had learned to associate with distress rather than agitation, the right paw rotating slightly inward with each turn. She noted it without writing it down. She stood in the corridor doorway and watched him pace and thought about amber eyes in a painted portrait and 9 years of a man living inside an animal's body and what it would mean to have that body declared legally empty. Harlan came to the East Wing at dusk. He did not have the look of someone who had decided what to do. He had the look of someone who had decided they could no longer afford to leave a decision unmade. "Walk with me," he said. They went to his office. The fire was already burning, which meant he had planned to come here before he came to find her. He closed the door and stood in the middle of the room and did not move toward the chair or the table or the window, which was how she understood that whatever he had to say did not have a position that felt right for it. "Fenwick presented a legal petition this morning," he said. 9 years in form of a beast constitutes civil death under 3 separate statutes that predate my father's reign. He is arguing that Vielle should be declared legally deceased, his titles dissolved, his standing as heir removed from all official record. He paused. "The court will vote in 6 days." She said nothing. If the vote passes, Vielle becomes, in the eyes of the law, an animal, a dangerous one at that. Any lord with sufficient cause could petition for his removal. He said the last word with a flatness that was the most honest thing about the sentence. "What do you need from me?" He looked at her directly. "I need to know whether what Maeve told you is all she told you." "She told me the first condition," Nora said. "She told me she knows the rest and was waiting until she felt it was time. And she hasn't told you yet." "No." He turned toward the fire, stood with his hands clasped behind his back. "I'm going to tell you what I know. Then we're going to Maeve together." He did not look at her when he spoke next. "I owe you the honesty of explaining why I haven't done this before now." She waited. "When you arrived, you were a complication. That was a genuine assessment, not a dismissal. Someone who could approach Vielle without injury was either a threat I didn't understand or a possibility I couldn't afford to be wrong about. I kept information from you because I was managing risk." He paused. "I kept managing you that way past the point where it was honest. The morning of the poisoning should have changed that. I am changing it now." She accepted that without comment. It was an honest accounting, and he had not dressed it in apology, which she found she respected. "Tell me about the curse," she said. He told her from the beginning. Vielle had been 32 years old when it happened. 8 years of ruling alongside their father, 12 years before that as the designated heir, trained for the position from the time he could sit a horse. He had been conducting a patrol through the Northern Territories, a routine assessment of border disputes, nothing that required a military presence. A practitioner had been working the roads there for years, small workings, mostly benign, the kind of solitary magic that does not usually produce conflict unless someone crosses a line. She crossed a line. She came to Vielle's camp and asked for his cooperation. The village of West Hall, 3 miles north. She wanted it gone. Old grudge, old wound. She had the capacity to do it, and she wanted the authority of the crown behind the act. Vielle refused. He sent her away. He wrote a detailed report that night by campfire and dispatched a rider before dawn. Our father received the report, Harlan said. He sent his own riders to Westhall to ensure her approach was anticipated. He issued a formal order revoking whatever limited permissions she had been operating under. He stopped. By the time his riders arrived, she was already at our gate. Our father died 3 winters later. The crown passed to me because the realm could not seat an heir in a wolf's body, and every ruling since then has been built over that fracture rather than through it. He crossed to the table. Among the papers there was a folded piece of vellum, very old, the edges soft with handling. He set it in front of her. She unfolded it carefully. The first 4 lines were legible. Clear script, old ink, nothing wrong with it. The 5th line began, and then the ink disappeared. Not faded, not smeared, absent. The line simply stopped mid-sentence, and the rest of the page was blank. "It reads that way for everyone," he said. "Every practitioner I've brought in, every expert in binding work. The healer 5 years ago, who died 9 days after trying to get close enough to study the curse directly." His voice did not shift on that last part. He had said it often enough that the weight of it had settled. She designated a single reader, whoever received Vielle from her hands that morning. Maeve. I knew that 2 weeks after it happened. Maeve has known the full text for 9 years. He folded the vellum again without looking at it. She told me there was a clause. She told me it required someone specific, rather than someone with skills. She would not tell me what it required. He looked at Nora steadily. I was not certain until recently whether that was her protecting me from false hope or protecting the clause from being engineered. I think it was both. And now you have 6 days. Now I have 6 days. She stood. Take me to Maeve. Maeve opened her door before Harlan could knock. She looked at the 2 of them standing in her hallway and stepped back without being asked. The 3 of them stood in the small caretaker's room. The ledger was closed on the table. The candle had burned down to its last third. "You know why we're here," Harlan said. "Yes." The full text. Maeve's hands were at her sides. She had the posture of someone who has been standing in a particular doorway in her mind for years and has now arrived at the real one. "The first condition has been met," she said. "A person offered what they had without fear and without calculation. The wolf accepted." Harlan said nothing. "The second condition requires the same person to permit the wolf to mark them willingly." She kept her eyes level, moving between both of them. "Not a mate bond. The original text calls it a recognition seal. Older than pack law, older than the bond as it is currently understood. The wolf marks the person who accepted it. The person must hold still, must not resist." She paused. "The risk is that Vielle has been in that form for 9 years. His control over his own force is not what a man's control would be. If the hunger breaks through during the act, or if he cannot moderate the pressure, he could kill her," Harlan said. Flat. "Yes." The room was very quiet. "That is the clause," Maeve said. "Those are the 2 conditions. The first has been met. The second has not." Harlan looked at Nora. She kept her face still and returned his gaze. "No," he said. She did not respond. "I am not entertaining this," he said. "We have 6 days. There are other avenues, legal challenges, other practitioners." "You have had 9 years and other avenues," Maeve said without heat. His jaw tightened. "I will not put a person's life at risk on the basis of a clause delivered by a woman who constructed it as cruelty. She constructed it that way because she knew it would require something real," Maeve said. "The clause has internal logic. The recognition seal was designed to bind a wolf to the person who accepted its trust. It cannot be performed on an unwilling recipient because the wolf reads resistance as threat. The recipient must be genuinely unafraid." She looked at Nora. "The woman who delivered Vielle told me that if the right person ever arrived, I would know, because the wolf would stop performing and start remembering." She paused. He laid his head in her lap during a fever. The silence extended. "We are not deciding this tonight," Harlan said. He came to the east wing the following morning before her shift began. She was in the corridor tying her apron. He was alone. I want to show you something, he said. Get your cloak. She got her cloak. He led her through the castle and down a long passage she had not used before, past a guard post where the men stepped aside without a word, through a gate at the base of the north wall that required his key. Beyond it was a path she had not known existed, a track through rough grass that led toward the tree line, perhaps a quarter-mile from the outer wall. She had not been outside the castle grounds since her arrival. The air was different, larger. The sky without walls around it had a different quality, and she stopped walking for a moment just to locate herself in it. Harlan did not comment on this. They moved toward the trees. Before they reached the forest's edge, he stopped and pointed left. Vielle was already there. He moved along the boundary between open ground and tree cover in a way that was entirely different from the castle. No deliberateness, no economy of motion. The containment he maintained inside the walls, that held in quality, each movement decided before it happened, was absent. He ranged, he cut back. He went several yards into the tree line and came out again. He was tracking something low in the grass, and then he was not. And the transition between states had no transition in it, no visible decision. Just one state and then another. She watched him for a long time. He is different here, she said. Yes, he's faster. Considerably. He stood beside her with his arms at his sides. In 9 years, I have not found a constraint that holds him when he does not want to be held. He maintains the limits of the grounds by choice. I do not know whether that is because he understands that leaving would end in his death, or because something else is keeping him here. She watched Vielle cut back from the trees and move along the grass in a long, reaching stride that covered ground in seconds. You brought me here so I would understand the scale of the risk, she said. I brought you here because I owe you honesty about what Vielle is, not only what he is capable of. He paused. And because I have been treating you as a factor in a problem rather than as a person making her own assessments. I am aware of what that has cost in time. He looked at her. It will not produce a different answer about the clause. I will not permit it. She kept her eyes on the wolf moving along the tree line. He came north because she asked for his compliance in something wrong, she said. He refused. He paid for the refusal with 9 years. She watched Vielle drop low into the grass, motionless for a count of 4, then surge forward. That is not a story about a man who needed protection. That is a story about a man who knew the cost and paid it anyway. Harlan said nothing. What you will or will not permit is your concern, she said. Not with anger. Simply as a fact being set down between them, the same way he set facts down when he needed them to exist outside of himself. What I decide is mine. The wind came off the forest and moved through the grass between them and the tree line. Vielle raised his head at the edge of the trees and looked back toward them, the amber eyes finding Nora's face at that distance with no apparent difficulty, the same attention he carried in the linen room doorway and the east corridor, and the chamber during the fever. Steady and specific and entirely present. Then he turned and went back into the trees. Harlan stood beside her for a moment longer. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted to something quieter, with a different quality underneath it. Something he had not put in the room before. He was going to be a better king than me, he said. He had 12 more years of preparation. He had the patience for it. He stopped, restarted without the stop being visible in his voice. I have spent 9 years trying to hold what he would have held better, and I have done it knowing he was in that body, and there was nothing I could do. The morning the note arrived, I was 3 days' ride south. I turned back immediately. I did not reach the gate before sunset. He looked at the tree line. Maeve had him already settled in the lower courtyard. She told me she had given him water and that he had taken it from her hands. He said nothing more on the walk back. She walked beside him through the grass and through the gate and through the long passage, and when they reached the point where their routes separated, she stopped and he stopped, and she looked at him in the light of the indoor corridor where all the open sky clarity of the outside was gone, and he was again the man in the working room with the maps and the cooling cup, 9 years older than the portrait in the gallery. You should get a legal challenge prepared, she said, for the vote. You should pursue every avenue you have. He held her gaze. And you should know, she said, that I am not afraid of him. She left him in the corridor and went to begin her shift. She waited until the fourth night. Not because she had planned to wait that long, because the first night she had decided and then sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the castle settle into its sleeping hours, and the weight of what she was deciding had been too large to move through without understanding its shape. The second night, the lower courtyard had 2 guards posted at the outer passage. Harlan's doing, she suspected, or perhaps Maeve's, or both. The third night, the guards were still present. The fourth night, they were not. She did not interpret that as permission. She interpreted it as Harlan understanding that a lock she had already decided to walk through would not stop her and would only cost him the dignity of having tried. She dressed, tied her boots, left her room without a candle. The castle at that hour was different in ways she registered through her feet. The vibration of the night watch on the upper walk, distant and rhythmic, the absence of the kitchen's persistent low hum. She moved through the east wing and down the back stairs and through the ground-level passage that led out near the old granary. From there, it was open ground to the lower courtyard's side entrance. The night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes the air feel precise. She crossed the open ground between the granary wall and the courtyard gate and pushed it open. Vael was already awake. She did not know how he knew. She had made no sound he should have been able to hear at that distance. But he was on his feet when she entered, turned toward the gate, the amber eyes catching the available light and holding it. He stood still while she crossed the courtyard. Did not advance, did not retreat. She stopped 4 feet from him. I know you understand me, she said. You have understood me for weeks. I am not going to pretend otherwise tonight. His ears tracked her voice. The left one first. I spoke with Maeve. I know what the second condition requires. She kept her voice level. Not performance, just the plain weight of what she meant. I am telling you that I am choosing this, not because someone told me to, not because of the vote or Fenwick or any of it. She paused. Because you refused her. 9 years ago in the Northern Territories, you refused her and paid for it. I have been thinking about that since Harlan told me. She looked at the scarred muzzle and the amber eyes and the enormous stillness of him in the cold night air. I don't think you should spend a 10th year in there because nobody was willing to do something that carries a risk. He did not move. I am not afraid of you, she said. I want to be clear about that because Maeve said it matters. It is not bravery. You have never given me a reason to be afraid of you. You gave me every reason not to be. She crouched down. Not all the way to the ground, enough to lower herself from her full standing height, enough to bring her face level with his if he came closer. She held out her right hand. Palm up, open. The same gesture as the courtyard 3 weeks ago, except that this time there was nothing in her hand. No bread, no offering, just the hand itself. He looked at it. He stood there for a long time, long enough that the cold settled through her cloak, and she felt it in her knees and her jaw. She did not hurry him. She did not speak again. She held the position and waited. When he moved slowly. Each step measured, the weight transferred with a deliberateness she recognized from the linen room doorway, from the corridor, from the mornings he had chosen proximity over distance. He came forward until he was close enough that she could feel the warmth off his chest against her outstretched hand. He lowered his head. The scarred muzzle touched her palm first. A press of dry, warm skin, not a nuzzle, not an animal's greeting. Something more precise than that. Something that recognized the shape of what she was offering and acknowledged it. Then his mouth opened. She felt the teeth, not the full force of them. The pressure was controlled, carefully, effortfully, visibly controlled. She could see it in every line of him, the locked set of the jaw operating against its own instinct, the tremble running through the muscles of his neck and shoulders, a man's will working through an animal's body at the exact point where those two things were most in conflict. His eyes stayed open and on her face the entire time, and they were the most human thing she had ever seen. She did not pull back. The teeth pressed into the back of her hand, not breaking skin first, holding, applying pressure in increments, each increment a decision rather than a reflex. She felt the pain arrive slowly, building, and she sat with it and kept her eyes on his, and when the skin finally broke, it was controlled and exact, and what came after was not pain so much as heat. A spreading, concentrated heat moving up the back of her hand and into her wrist and forearm, carrying something with it that had no physical property she could name. Something that settled into the bones beneath the skin and simply stayed. The mark. The curse made a sound. She heard it as vibration first, through the stone beneath her, up through her knees, into her spine. A tightening and then a tearing, not in flesh, but in the air itself, in the quality of the space around them. Vial pulled back and stood over her, and his body began to do the thing she had witnessed during the fever, but more completely, more total. The fur cycling, the form destabilizing, the cycling becoming a rhythm, and then the rhythm becoming a collapse. She got to her feet. The transformation was not what the story said. It was not fluid, and it was not graceful, and it was not brief. It lasted a very long time. She stood at the edge of it and watched and did not look away. The sounds it produced were not sounds she would be able to describe later. Not accurately, not fully. She registered them and kept her position, and each time the process seemed to seize up or pause in a way that looked like failure. She said his name. Once. Clearly. Not a command and not a comfort, just a marker. He was not alone in this courtyard. At some point, the east gate opened. Harlan came through at a near run and stopped at the edge of the cleared space. She glanced at him. His eyes were on the figure on the ground. His face had a quality she had not seen on it before. Not the controlled flatness of the working room or the quiet of the forest path. Something raw and held very still by the same effort that held everything else he carried. "How long?" he said. "I don't know. An hour. More." He came to stand beside her. She heard voices outside the gate behind them, raised, arguing, 2 sets of footsteps and then more. The gate pushed open again, and a man in night clothing entered with 4 guards behind him, and Nora recognized Fenwick before she could see his face clearly, by the bearing and by the particular quality of the speed he was moving at. Not alarm, strategy. "The beast is transforming," Fenwick said, loudly enough to carry. "It is destabilizing. This is a danger to everyone in these grounds." "You will stand where you are," Harlan said. His voice had a different register in it. Not the voice of the working room. Something older. Something that originated from a different part of him than the part that weighed decisions. "My lord, the court has not yet voted. If the creature dies in the course of this, you will stand where you are." Fenwick stopped. The 4 guards stopped with him. One of them looked uncertain in a way that the other 3 did not, and she filed that away for Harlan's benefit. The transformation reached its final stage. She understood it was the final stage because the sound changed. The cycling stopped. The quality of what was on the ground shifted from the violence of the process to the stillness of something completed. And then there was a man on the stone of the lower courtyard. He was on his hands and knees, dark hair falling forward, broader across the shoulder than Harlan, heavier in the frame, in the way of a man who had been built for physical work over a long life. The nose slightly crooked along the bridge, as the portrait had shown. He was breathing in deep, shaking intervals, each breath the breath of someone learning again that this was what breathing felt like. This capacity, this volume, this particular use of a body that had not had these dimensions for 9 years. He raised his head. Amber eyes. The same amber. Looking first at Harlan, then across the courtyard at Nora, then behind him at Fenwick and the guards standing at the gate. He pushed himself upright. It took 2 attempts. On the second attempt, he was standing. He looked at Fenwick for a long moment. He said nothing. He did not need to. They moved inside before the cold finished what the transformation had started. Maeve appeared from somewhere with a cloak and the practical composure of someone who had already cried in private and was not going to do it here. Vial accepted the cloak without speaking. He walked under his own weight through the passage and into the main hall with Harlan on his left and Nora 3 steps behind. And the servants who had been woken by the noise and gathered in doorways saw the prince of the realm walk through the castle he had left as a wolf. Fenwick's 4 guards were separated and held individually. The one who had looked uncertain proved, under questioning by Harlan's captain, to be the most useful of the 4. His information filled the shape of what Fenwick had been building: the channels, the payments, the source of the Nightbloom route, the names of the two lords whose votes he had secured. It was thorough, and it was damaging, and it was not enough to dismantle 9 years of groundwork in a single night, and Harlan did not pretend otherwise. By noon, the petition itself was effectively dead. Too many people had seen Vielle return to human form, and Fenwick's argument of civil death could not survive a prince walking the halls under his own name. What remained was everything Fenwick had built beneath that argument: the favors owed, the assumptions settled into law, the men who had arranged their futures around a vacancy they believed was coming. "This will take months," he told her the following morning. "Possibly a full year. The legal structure he built has 20 hands in it, and most of them are not criminal. They believed they were acting in reasonable anticipation of an outcome the law supported. And the ones who knew about the poisoning, those will face the full weight of it. The others will face a different process." He sat at his table with the maps moved aside and the morning light coming through the window at a low angle. "I am telling you this because I am not going to have you believe it was resolved cleanly. I didn't think it was. No." A pause. "You rarely think things are other than they are." She kept her hands folded in her lap. The back of her right hand was wrapped in clean linen, dressed by the healer the previous night. The mark beneath the linen had not changed since the courtyard. The heat of it had subsided into a steady, low warmth, something she was aware of without being troubled by, the same way she was aware of the scar on her left knee from a childhood fall. Present. Part of the accounting of her. "How is he?" she asked. Harlan was quiet for a moment. "Vielle." Adjusting. He looked at the table. "He has not spoken much. The healer says that is normal. The throat, the tongue, the weight of language through a human frame. It will return over days." He stopped. Then, "He asked for you this morning." She looked up. "He asked Maeve your name when he woke. Maeve told him your name and how you came to be here." He met her eyes. "He said to tell you thank you, and that the bread was good." She was quiet for a moment. "The debt," she said. "Has it been recorded as settled?" He looked at her steadily. "Yes. As of this morning. 3 years reduced to 7 weeks on the basis of—" He paused. "Extraordinary service to the crown. Then I am no longer bound to be here." "No." His voice held nothing she could use as a guide. "You are not." She looked at the window and the low morning light coming through it. Outside, she could hear the castle beginning its day. The distant metal sound of the kitchen starting, the measured footfall of the watch changing over on the upper walk. A place she had learned through her feet and her eyes and the back of a notebook. Corridors she could navigate in the dark. She looked back at Harlan. "I will need a room with a better window," she said. "The one in the east wing looks over the wall garden, which is fine, but the light goes in the afternoon." Something shifted in his face. Careful and controlled, and present underneath the control. "The north wing has rooms with western exposure," he said. "That would work." He nodded. He looked down at the table. He looked up again. He had the expression of a man who has spent a very long time being precise and deliberate, and is now sitting with someone who has just declined to make him perform the asking. "The morning assignment schedule," she said. "I'll need to know what changes. Orwell will have the revised lists by midday." She stood. She crossed to the door. Behind her, she heard the familiar sound of him rising from the chair, and then not following, just standing. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "He would have been a good king," she said. A pause behind her. "Yes, so would you," she said. "For different reasons." She left him in the room with the maps and the morning light and whatever he was going to do with that, and she went down the corridor toward the east wing to begin the work of changing rooms. 6 weeks later, Vielle walked the full length of the north garden on his own for the first time without stopping to rest. She was on the upper path when it happened, returning from the stores with a basket, and she paused at the railing to watch. He moved differently in his own body than he had in the wolf's, more careful, less instinctive, still relearning the specific weight and reach of a human frame. But the amber eyes were the same when he looked up and saw her watching. He stopped walking. He raised one hand. A plain gesture. Acknowledgement between two people who had already said what mattered in a courtyard at night. She raised hers in return. On her right hand, The linen wrapping was gone now. The mark sat visible on the back of her hand, not large, not dramatic. 2 small points of scar tissue with a faint discoloration spreading from them, already settled into her skin the way Maeve had said it would, the way old things settle when they have decided to stay. She went back to the stores. Harlan found her an hour later in the corridor outside the linen room, which was where he often found her, and he walked with her back toward the north wing without a specific purpose offered, and she did not ask for one. The afternoon light came through the western windows at a long, level angle, and the corridor was warm with it, and neither of them said very much at all.